Good morning, good evening, wherever you may be across the nation or around the world. Once again, you are listening to the VMware Community's Roundtable Podcast. This is podcast number 589, and my name is Eric Nelson, and with me today I have my regular co-host, Matt Longeth. Today is Wednesday, January 26, 2022. Matt, how's it going?
Eric, I went down another deep, dark rabbit hole as far as internet lore, and I'll give you a quick little background on this. So in and around central Pennsylvania, there is a local ski hill. And prior to it being a ski hill, it was part of an air defense system. I always kind of wondered what that was and why it was up there, and why was it chosen for that particular area. And that led me to going down, again, this rabbit hole of something called SAGE, which was an acronym for the Semi-Automatic Ground Environment Air Defense System. And I started to go through and find out about this whole entire project that was actually at the time budgeted for more than what the Manhattan Project, which obviously led to everything that we have for nuclear defense and whatnot, well exceeded that. And there is so much, and I bring this up about it because of what this program ended up creating. Things like structured programming and CPU timing and communications networks and communications protocol. For the listeners out there, there is a great YouTube series that the Computer History Museum put on that goes through and just absolutely does a fantastic deep dive on all things SAGE. And it really just brought it back of everything, as we talk about today, and some of our guests, and speaking about NSX and just where we had come from, and some of the transportation protocols that are out there, and just communications and whatnot. And it was just a fabulous deep dive to go in of how air defense led to a lot of our current programming and network communications for where we ended up. But That's enough of my last couple of weeks. My favorite questions always to ask are, how are you? How are things out there on the West Coast? And most importantly, what is the color of the bay?
I'm doing great, Matt. And I'll just say if you go missing, we know what happened to you. You went, trudging through some mountainside and got caught up in some new security program that's there that you're not supposed to know about. And that was the end of you. So, I've heard those stories before. It is beautiful weather here in California. It's sunny and nice. We've had some dry weather. So the blue skies are out, the sun is out, and it's some nice, 68 degrees here. So from a winter perspective, it's pretty nice. It's supposed to start raining again in another couple of weeks, so we'll see how that goes. Color of the bay, it's just a nice clean green, no chop. It's been smooth here in the bay. We got this nice weather. My beehives are out. Everybody's like, I don't want to say Indian summer, but it feels a little bit like that. So beautiful weather. On the show, we are going to be talking about NSX-T. 3.2 is out. 3.2.1, I think, is what it is. And so we have Geoff Shukin and Thomas. Thomas, I didn't get your last name, but we'll introduce him. Both of them are from the NSVU to talk about networking. It's a really cool release. I would say if you're listening to this, you should stay. I've been looking at NSX-T 3.2. There's a lot of cool new features that we'll get into, which I'm actually pretty impressed with. So I can't wait to get into that. But before we do that, let's talk a little bit about the news. We did a multi-cloud briefing. So if you've been on social watching, you should have seen by now that Victoria, Kit Colbert, and some customer references are talking about the latest multi-cloud discussions that we're having. A lot of good, security, networking, as well as vSphere, in the data center and in cloud. So go check out that briefing. It's kind of cool because they have an intro from that famous scientist, and I don't have his name now, of course. He's a physicist, but he had a little intro from him. Then Kit's there, great customer demo. I would definitely recommend you go listen to that. It's on vmware.com. The URL is cross-cloud-services.html, but it's also on the front banner. You can't miss it. Go check that out. That one is one that you got to listen to it for. Oh, there it is. Dr. Michio Kaku is the guy that does the introduction. He's a famous physicist, and he talks about change and how to manage change. Really cool presentation. You got to get through at least half of it, though. I think it's like a 45-minute session. The first bits are just the kind of the high level, what you would expect from a briefing. But then as you get into the briefing, they have a customer that shows up and talks about their Tanzu roadmap and how they got to Tanzu. They started with Kubernetes. They started with different clouds. They migrated from different clouds. It's a really interesting story if you're thinking about how to build Tanzu, solutions in a multi-cloud environment. Thought that was pretty good. And then Kit wraps it up at the end, and Kit is always fun to listen to. So I strongly recommend that one. Go check that out. That's worth listening to. I learned a couple things, which is pretty cool. vExpert applications are open. So I think they're closing at the end of the month. And so you got a few more days. If you've been under a rock and you haven't heard about that, that's still going on. We are grandfathering everybody in that was in last year just because COVID is still here, and it's hard for everybody to get out and, make a difference in the world. So we're grandfathering, but you can also apply if you haven't been in the program yet. And also update your apps. It's always good to keep an updated app on the platform. And then finally, VMworld 2022, a little bit of snippet storyline here. Getting excited about that. And the reason I'm excited, Matt, is the big screens that we have on when you go to VMworld, there's the big social screens that hang over the venues. And
sure, it's the one that we have the VMworld, the cutout, and everyone gets their picture in front of it, and that's their banner for their social for the next year until they go to the next event. And we've been missing out on that, right?
Yeah, right. We miss out on everybody's tweets and sharing and getting to watch crazy pictures and all that. And normally we spend like, $40,000 a year on the software called Weigh-In. Oddly enough, Scott McNeely from Sun used to run that company. He, started it, I think, or bought it. I don't know. But nonetheless, Weigh-In, we haven't bought them in a couple of years because we haven't had any need for big screen aggregation software that does that. And the event team came to us last week and said, all right, let's go buy the Weigh-In license. And we on my team, build that and get that started and set up the screens and, manage the content, and all the security policies have to be so that bad content doesn't show up on massive screens. So we do that as part of the event support function that we do. But it's just exciting to know that, all right, we're buying the Weigh-In licenses. We're getting ready to, do the deed, right? So I'm excited about the fact that it looks like we are really going to have an in-person VMworld. It's coming to fruition, and I'm going to get my.
I'm sure we'll have Allison Croker and that team on soon enough as guests, and we'll get to hear all about it.
Yeah, there's going to be some exciting stuff being announced. I am not allowed to say anything, but I would say that it's going to be an exciting time.
I'm with a bang, right? Yeah, back in person with a significant event.
Definitely back with a bang. That's all I got for the news. So let's get to our main topic, which is NSX-T 3.2. We always start out with an introduction to our guest, Thomas. I'll start with you, Thomas. Why don't you tell me how to say your last name and tell me a little bit about who you are, how long you've been worked at VMware, and what's your career arc look like? Where did you come out of college or not college? How did you get here? Okay. Give us a couple minute elevator pitch of who you are.
Okay.
And do you go by Tom or Thomas?
Both are okay.
Okay.
So my name is Thomas, Thomas Vigneron. Vigneron is French. It means winemaker, by the way. Right. So I am PM in the NSBU. I've been PM for 4 years now. So I work on automation, multi-tenancy. I worked on V2T migration, NSX Cloud, so a bunch of things. And before that, I had been an NSX sales specialist in France, so covering the different accounts in France for 4 years also. So I started at the very beginning of the NSX adventure in Europe. So it was 2014. The team was getting built to start with NSX-V at the time. We started a bit later than the US. And before that, I came out of a French engineering school working on cybersecurity.
Nice. All right. Well, that's a good intro. Thank you for joining us on the show. I think this is your first time here, right?
Yes, it is. Thank you for having me.
Oh no, great. So it's a great release. Geoff, Shukin, why don't you do the same? Tell us who you are.
Thank you. Yes. So, yes, Geoff Shukin. So I'm a relatively newcomer to the NSBU product marketing, product management team. Actually, only about a month into the role. Not new to VMware. So VMware for about 7 years. All my time being spent in, like Thomas, the sales and support of NSX into our accounts. So kind of really early days of NSX, the V days where we were, really trying to change customers' minds about, what networking could be, what security could be, and did some really cool and innovative things. Prior to that, I was with a startup company called Palo Alto Networks. Super lucky to be reasonably early into that company. And this was, the time where people were starting to say, well, is a 5-tuple firewall rule enough, or can I add additional context with things like what is the application, who is the user? So really transformative times in security. Prior to that, I spent some time at some of the big networking players, and my actual first job in IT was a summer student for the Canadian federal government. So fair warning, you can tell Thomas is from a different place. I'm from Canada, so I may throw in a few funny words like A from time to time, so you'll have to just deal with that. But I worked for the Canadian federal government in IT, kind of when computers were just sort of appearing on people's desks. So you can tell there's some wisdom streaks in the beard here from time to time. So, but yeah, first time caller, long time listener to the show, and just really happy to be here talking about this release of NSX.
Yeah, it is interesting that, we talked before the show, the history of networking and how it was so hardware focused back in the days, right? Like when I was administrator, and like all the speeds and feeds of the protocols of the devices themselves. And then the software layer started layering on top. And all of a sudden, when you start to virtualize or just put software on top of it, then virtualize and then embed firewall, that everything comes together. It's just such an interesting pleasure to be up at the top software layer where you can understand more what's happening, right, from a software perspective, versus the days of hardware and protocols and like really needing to know the OS, the Cisco OS.
Oh, come on, Eric. Everybody loves a good vampire tap and a BNC connector every once in a while, right?
Right. Sure. Yeah. Stuff goes right over my head, right? That was the biggest problem, is that when you had to actually have these switches and really go get training from the university, from the Cisco training program to really understand all the layers that were there. It was tough as a systems administrator to get enough time to even learn all the acronyms, right? Let alone, but as it's layered into Vcenter, like the whole network switches in software, and now NSX in NSX-T, you can actually get your head around it, which is fun to see. So we always usually start with like the NSX-T. Before we get into 3.2.1, where has NSX-T gotten in the last couple releases? Maybe we can just do a summary, and I don't know if Geoff or Thomas, you guys, who wants to handle that, but just, kind of bring us up to speed as to, we obviously had NSX, then we had NST, which is multi-cloud. Give us some history of how we got it.
So maybe I can do the big picture and let Geoff go into more details, because typically around security and different features which came in the last releases. So the big picture from things started a long time ago with Nicira, who started typically this journey with this idea that networking might be better if you could configure it from a single place, have it in software, have it distributed in the data plane, but centralized in the way to consume it, which then was acquired by VMware and gave NSXV. And NSX typically was, at this point in time, really tied into the Vsphere world, one-to-one with Vcenter for the VMs. But we already saw a lot of adoption for this model. the ability to bring networking, to bring security at the VMs, to manage everything from one single point, to do things from API, and to not have to do all those different setups, all those different configurations, and all those different equipments between different teams. And then we moved to NSX-T with this idea of having a platform which will allow typically to connect VMs, to connect containers, to connect bare metals across multiple environments. NSX-T was multi-vCenter from the beginning. And we continue to build on top of this platform. So from the basic networking features, layer 2, layer 3, layer 4 security, to things which are more and more advanced today, IDS, IPS, and maybe I can let Geoff go into more details on those latest things.
Yeah, I follow along with that, right? Which is, Nicira purchase. You just summarize Nicira purchase, NSX, totally integrated with vSphere, right? Mm-hmm. And so it was like kind of like then to NSX-T, which is the separation, right, where you can now run it and manage multiple clouds, multiple endpoints. So that the separation from vSphere directly, I guess maybe that's the wrong way to say it, but it's expanded out. We're now.
Yeah, go on. Sorry.
No, it's fine. Expanded out to where now you're managing and up the stack, managing Kubernetes and all the applications and tracking zero trust environments. So I get that whole narrative. I'm trying to remember where we got from 3.0, right? Like 3.0 to 3.1. There were some decent features that came out, and now we're at 3.2. Was there as much change in 3.0 to 3.1 that we see from 3.1 to 3.2? Yeah, I don't. Yeah, Geoff is shaking his head. Yeah,
I think 3.2 is probably the biggest release that the BU has ever done in terms of features.
Right.
And if you rewind the clock a little bit, when Thomas was working in France, I was working in Western Canada, very, very early on in NSXV's lifetime, we discovered that security was a very interesting use case for the product. Being able to microsegment, as you mentioned, these workloads in a really different way. And again, if you rewind back when you were talking about switches and Cisco and we needed networking to do security. We had to have some sort of a construct that allowed us to do security in an interesting way. Firewalls became the default gateway for a particular VLAN or a particular segment. And this let us do some pretty interesting things. But in this time, next generation firewalls were appearing. We saw the attackers pivot, and they said, okay, we can't get through these boundaries that they've put in place with the firewall, but in the segment or in the VLAN itself, we can do anything we want. So what we saw attackers, sort of pivot to this concept of what we call lateral movement. And so they would just kind of hop along looking for a workload that they could use to go across that segmentation boundary. And this is really where microsegmentation became very interesting to customers, because we weren't even really seeing what was happening in those segments, let alone being able to control it. And here comes this product where we could overlay on top of your existing infrastructure and do some really incredible things, not only from a visibility perspective, but from a control perspective. And this really, I think, launched the product kind of on its trajectory, this fantastic trajectory that we've been on, for the past 7 or 8 years. And 3.2 really builds on that strong foundation. As Thomas mentioned, we can do, some distributed firewall policy. We could do some intrusion detection, intrusion prevention, but we could even go further, where we can go into things like sandboxing and threat anomaly detection, where we, are able to look at traffic patterns and say, we've never seen that before.
Right.
Are we sure that we should be letting that happen?
Right. So before we get into like just all those topics, the multi-cloud security, zero trust enablement, network traffic analysis, the NTA, one thing I got to ask is like Do we still focus on other network connection services? Do we focus on performance? Do we still also move the networking technology forward as well? Because I know we're going to talk a lot about security and streamline the operations to manage all of this, and it's super important. I see like the security aspect of networking being like 50% of networking these days, right? But do we still also move, the performance of networks forward?
Yeah, that's a very good question. So NSX 3.2 is also a very big release because typically of architectural improvement, for instance, to improve the performance of the API, the time of realization of the objects. So things which are done internally to tweak the product to make sure that consumption is at its best, in addition to features, that's the first part. And also in this release, you'll find typically some networking improvements, some very advanced features in networking like EVPN, multicast, which are getting improved typically, or federation. Federation was the big feature of the 3.0 release, so federation continues to get improved. And also what you'll see is typically the integration with Avi, because one of the big things which appeared also from 3.0, 3.1 to 3.2 is the acquisition of Avi. So Avi is getting integrated as NSX Advanced Load Balancer in Nsxt UI and Nsxt API to allow also advanced services around load balancers. So yes, there's not only security, there's a lot of security, and security is very important, but we are bringing a number of things, typically in networking, in services like load balancers, and also in improvement of the quality, performance, and also monitoring typically of the product in this release.
Yeah. All right, that's fair. Good to know. And Avi Networks, when did we acquire them? Like a couple of years ago?
So be around 2 or 3 years ago.
Yeah. Time. COVID is one of these things where it just blacks out part of my brain, so it's hard to really put dates on things anymore, right? Like I think it was like a year before COVID or something, but then now everything is a blur. All right, so getting into NSX-T 3.2. Thank you for that overview, and thank you for kind of warming our brain up to the topics. I will do a shout out to Brandon Lee, who actually put a blog together on NSX-T 3.2, what's new. I think he published it sometime in December. I will put that. It's at www.virtualizationhowto.com. Look for VMware NSX-T 3.2. You can Google it. He's one of the top hits. Great blog article that kind of goes through the topics. So if you guys are listening to this podcast and you want to go read some hard text on all the topics and see some graphs, you can go to his blog. So shout out to Brandon Lee for putting together a nice blog on what's new in 3.2. And we just kind of talk through some of the stuff he calls out and other things that you call out. So shout out to him. I'll put that in the chat in case you guys want to go look at that blog. And we can start talking about 3.2. So one of the things he goes through is, he starts talking about multi-cloud security, zero trust enablement, network traffic analysis, and NTA into the NSX distributed firewall. We can start there, start talking about those features or whatever you want to talk to. Geoff, since it's security, we can chat.
Yeah, so, again, 3.2 really advances the security capabilities, and actually in two different directions. And it's really important to think about, going what I'll call sort of, into sort of adjacent markets. So, getting into threat anomaly detection and sandboxing and these types of technologies. But it also goes back the other way, because we don't want to forget about, customers that just want to get started in segmentation or microsegmentation. Maybe they don't have the same level of staff or the same requirements. And one of the really neat features of 3.2 is, we'll just call it sort of, distributed firewall, intrusion prevention, right on native vSphere port groups. So we don't need to, have the overlay components of NSX to do these security features. And in fact, what we've gone ahead and done is from within Vcenter, allowed an administrator to install NSX and actually a wizard-driven process to develop a policy for segmentation or even microsegmentation. And I'm envisioning smaller workloads or pardon me, smaller environments where maybe the vSphere administrator is also the network administrator, is also the firewall administrator, and this one pane of glass to sort of do this is really quite interesting. One of the things I used to love to tell customers, when I was an SE, was if we looked at the clock and we say, okay, it's just a little bit past 1 o'clock. If we started now, we could have microsegmentation in place in your environment before going home this evening. And people would always look at me like I was a little bit crazy. And really, this is the fruition of that. It's really being able to instantiate those requirements to be able to start developing and enforcing policy in an incredibly quick format. And that that doesn't maybe sound like a big deal, but the barrier to entry is very, very low. And I would certainly work with customers and partners to demonstrate this capability, because it really lets you get started and focused on what's important, not installation and upkeep, but developing a policy and looking at what's actually happening within your environment. This barrier to entry is terrifically low. So let's not forget that. But again, as we move forward into some of these additional security features, our ability to distribute the firewall policy, the intrusion detection policy, is been there for quite some time. But now we're overlaying things like network threat anomaly and like I was mentioning before, developing this idea of what does good look like, and if I see something that's outside of that norm, just raising an alert and saying, hey, this is kind of outside. And I'll give you an example, if that's all right. Let's say that we've got a segment or a microsegment, and we never see VM, the web server VM, RDPing to the app or the database, and it shouldn't, right? It probably should never do that. But all of a sudden, somebody sparks up that MSRDP connection. Well, it's probably only one of two things. It's probably Geoff, who's just, I'm not going to go through my jump box. I'm just going to go straight to where I need to get my job done. Hopefully that's it. Or number two, it's a bad actor doing the same thing. And so being able to raise an alert and even prevent that type of potentially malicious activity is really interesting. And so that's a really big development in 3.2 for us right now. So.
Geoff, along those lines, to jump around a little bit, I see now that we can install NSX Manager directly from the Vsphere Client.
Yeah,
right.
That's
you had spoke
huge.
to that easier installation for that single admin in those smaller environments, or someone that's more of that generalized admin. Can you speak to a little bit about that, or Thomas, of why we've made that decision to integrate that workflow now as far as the installation process within the Vsphere Client? I see we've also done some things here with Avi as well, with being able to configure it from that single pane of glass, which I think is great.
Yes, so the goal of all those are to simplify the consumption of NSX and to streamline it, to make it accessible to more people. So typically, for the first one, the fact that you can typically deploy and consume NSX from the Vcenter environment, what we have seen, and as Geoff was talking about that, is that you have a Vsphere environment, you would benefit from some of NSX services, for instance, security or some specific services, and you want that to be easy. You might not be a very big customer, you might not be someone with multiple teams running the environment, but just a sysadmin, but you want to implement, for instance, distributed security in your environment. And for that, having everything inside Vcenter makes it a lot easier for you. So the idea is to take the goodness of NSX-T and to make it accessible to most Vsphere customers, typically by having the ability to run things from the Vcenter UI also. So that's for the Vcenter UI. And for Avi, it's the same logic to be able to have one place to configure your load balancer, to be able to have like this integrated consumption. Of course, Avi continues to exist as a standalone product, and people who are using Avi in their environment, they can continue to use Avi. But to give an integrated experience is something important in order to allow the most people to get advantage of it.
And now that we're putting that into a single console, for those larger teams out there that would want to federate access or limit access to those particular consoles, I'm sure we support the entire normal vSphere permissions and user sets for limiting access to those particular control planes for if the organization would be large enough where they would want to segment the particular access to those feature sets.
So NSX has made a lot of efforts also on this part. So typically at the very beginning, if we go back to the beginning of the adventure, you basically were like an admin or an auditor, and you had a very restricted basically roles. And now you have much more of these roles, depending on your verticals. If you're a security admin, a security operator, and you also have the ability to define your own roles. So basically to be able to say that a given user is, let's say, can access distributed firewall, but not centralized firewall. So to build your own roles. So those are also things which are possible with NSX.
One of the things that I often will ask, traditional security teams, even in the past, is do you have access to vCenter? And of course, a lot of security teams simply say no. Well, I've never been given that opportunity. And I strongly encourage, a cross group collaboration, even if it's just read-only access, because there's such good information inside of vCenter from a security admin or security operations person's perspective. Being able to understand the context of a particular workload is huge, and really what better place to understand that from the a single source of truth like vCenter. So to your question, Matt, I think setting up those read-only or least permission type of roles in the products is hugely beneficial for all teams, whether they're network security, operations, even the the DevOps folks as they try to move faster and more left, as they like to call it.
Absolutely.
Hey, Matt, I have one that I've been looking at here, and I want to get, and this goes to Geoff. I see distributed malware prevention, right? It sounds a little bit like Norton or something. Like, we've got distributed malware protection and advanced threat protection to ATP. Like, so these are all great buzzwords, right? That they're nice marketing terms. They like, what are those, and are they real? If they came from last line, can you give us a summary of what that stuff actually is?
Yeah, no, and that's exactly correct, Eric. This is the first step of integration of the last line, product into NSX. And again, if we have this capability of, without having to force a ton of change into a customer's network. So I can start to grab things sort of seamlessly. I don't need taps or span ports to spew traffic over to sensors. If I can use the VMware network to grab this information, I can do a lot of very interesting things. And I think about the journey as we went from a traditional 5-tuple firewall rule to including things like application, user. This is the next natural step in that process. It's okay. I'm going to allow you to talk a particular application on a particular port, particular protocol, but now I'm going to look at what you're doing. Are you sending good traffic, or are you sending potentially malicious traffic? One of the first customer interactions I had on this was, I want to allow, and I have to sort of speak in general terms here, I want to allow my customer to upload files to me. They might be applications for something, like a form that I fill out and I submit. And I want to make sure that I'm not ingesting by accident anything that would be potentially malicious or not in my best interest. This could be an interesting way of looking at that and saying, oh, okay, wait a minute, that particular file that Matt uploaded, it has some telltale signs of being potentially malicious. Let me do some additional sanity checking of that. I may in fact detonate that in a sandbox environment. I may actually send it into the cloud and have a PDF reader open it and see what it does. Oh, well, it does look like it does look like malware. It does do some malicious things. Therefore, I'll flag it as malicious. And then when Eric uploads his, it doesn't have those, so I can let that go and let that be passed through without inspection. So it's driving these features again into the place in the network where we can start accessing these bits of information in really interesting ways, in really unobtrusive ways, and not having to deploy a bunch of like I say, span or tap or these kinds of things that we've done in the past to try and grab this information.
Okay, all right.
Geoff, as we're adding additional feature sets to the product, right, where it's expanding now into the security realm and we're doing real-time threat analysis and IDS, IPS, and whatnot, would you say, or I guess we could just go back to where we're at right now with the system requirements? Has this expanded? If I'm considering, if I'm on a, let's say 2 branch right now with T, and I want to go up to 3.2, for our managers and our edge appliance deployment, because we're expanding those feature sets, has the system requirements increased significantly, or is it just a little bit? What do I need as an admin as I'm considering all of these new feature sets? Is there additional VM requirements or hardware utilization that I need to think about prior to doing a full-blown 3.2 deployment?
Yeah, that's a great point. And as we ask the system to do more and more, obviously we do need more and more requirements from a compute capacity perspective. And I think the decision was made very early on not to impact the manager, the Nsx Manager itself, asking it to do more and more, because we need that control plane to be up and running and highly available and redundant and distributed. So we in 3.2 really revamped the way we're doing those additional services. So the threat anomaly detection, the malware prevention, and we have something called the Nsx Application Platform. We call it NAP. And this is actually a Kubernetes-based deployment that you'll set down in that traditional management zone. So you're not running this in the compute. You're probably running this, in a slightly different place. And because a lot of this new security technology is very, I'll say, math centric. There's a lot of AI and ML that gets done. And it tends to be very bursty as traffic patterns change, as things come in. We could be asking for more and more. So Kubernetes made a lot of sense to build this platform on. So NAP is a requirement in 3.2 as soon as you get into NSX Intelligence. NSX Intelligence used to be a single VM, albeit a fairly large one. It's now a service that runs on this Kubernetes cluster. Some of the metrics, some of the network detection and response, and the malware prevention are also worker nodes on this Kubernetes cluster that can scale up and down as required, so that we don't impact the manager. Because again, we wouldn't want to do that. I think the next logical question then is, how much of the host, the compute host, am I giving away
now
to do these features? And we're at a
if you're not tapping in and you're pulling it right out of the kernel, so to say,
yep.
what additional resources on the host now am I using as a background service that I'm sure that you guys are running as part of the installation package? Probably might even be running some type of microservice or something else that you have out there as a container in and of its own, what's that taking up? What do I need to account for? And
unfortunately,
what does that add into my overall cluster utilization?
Yeah.
Sure.
It's a great point. It's something to very keep in mind. You don't get this for free, quote unquote. I always like to say, let's talk about small single digit percentages, 2, 3, 4% of total CPU, because you're very right, Matt. We do this at the kernel of Vsphere. We do this in the ESXi kernel. So if you're running very, very, very tight consumption and you're 80+%, maybe we have to have a conversation. If you're like most customers and somewhat less than that, then the overhead doesn't potentially cause a problem. But we're very lucky because I think there's something coming, and I don't want to give away too many secrets here, but there definitely is a technology that's coming very, very quickly, that's going to offload a lot of this. So we're not going to be using host resources necessarily to do this in perpetuity. It's going to be something else. And so
those damn smart NICs, right?
Yeah,
they're just all over the place.
They're going to help in things like distributed storage, distributed security, distributed malware. Like it's all going to sort of come together here in a very interesting way. But that's future. Matt, to address the question at hand, we have to do this very carefully and precisely. We don't want to overwhelm the hosts by asking them to do things that are sort of background, taking away from the primary task, of course, of producing that workload or running that workload in a good manner. So
I was just thinking, not to go too far into future state, but for the NAP platform in general, how that could take advantage of vGPU, RISC, things that would be very eccentric to AI ML workloads, but I'm sure that we'll get there at some future state.
I think this is actually a good thing. Please just build more workload, because the number of cores that everybody's putting in the systems nowadays, I'm like, what are we going to do with all these cores? We're going to be out of a job. There's going to be one chip running the whole planet, right, with like a zillion cores in it. So in seriousness, that we got so many cores now that even if you are doing some workload, these things do well being assigned to a core, right? So I don't think they necessarily would bring the system to the knees, because you have so many cores. As long as it fits in a core, it's good.
And we certainly do things to make sure that we can lessen the impact or the blast radius, for example. So please talk to your sales engineer and TAM to help ensure that is done properly.
So when I was looking at the other features that are there, one of them we ran 12 days of Kubernetes. Cora Romero made a nice blog. So if you were new to Kubernetes over the holiday, you could go look, and we gave you 12 ways to get started, right? From watching videos to learning, taking some courses to setting up your home lab with the community edition of Tanzu. I noticed that you guys and maybe Thomas, you can talk to this. I don't know. You do look at now tagging objects like pods, containers, so forth in this new release. Can we talk a little bit about what that's good for? Yeah.
Yes, of course. So we have introduced some time ago some CNI from VMware called Antria. And Antria allows to provide networking and security services for Kubernetes environment independently of NSX. That's an open source project that is started but backed up also by VMware. So what we offer in NSX-T 3.2 is the ability to tie together Antria and NSX-T in order to provide both visibility. So from NSX to see typically the policies that your users are pushing from Kubernetes, but also policy management from NSX-T to be able to tag, to be able to push some security policies on those pods from NSX-T. So we tie the two together, and that's important because that allows to give a single pane of glass on all those containers environment for the admin, for the security admin, and be able to push common securities in those environments. It also brings, in addition to the security piece, It also extends some monitoring feature. One of which is really popular is the trace flow. So it also basically brings some troubleshooting tool like trace flow in order to basically troubleshoot those environments. Trace flow is a feature which allows you to have a packet from one port to the other and to see what is the life of this packet, which firewall does it go through, which networks, that type of things. And so now that is being extended basically to the ports of the containers with Entria.
Yeah, that makes sense. It just reminds me that podcast number 578, we did go through Project Anteria and talked about it, right? So that makes sense that now this is, and it was, I think, whether it was a fling or whether they were, integrating, they talked a little bit about that. So 578, if you want to go hear a little bit more about what Project Anteria is. So that makes sense. So thanks. Other things, Matt, that we should touch on. I think we have like 10 more minutes on the podcast. That we talked about the network provisioning, streamline network.
I have a 2-part question, Eric, for Geoff and Thomas that's out there, and I have one more before the top of the hour. But Geoff, we've obviously had some customers out here that have seen the light, so to say, that were early adopters for NSX-V.
Mm-hmm.
And they might still, for a myriad of different reasons, have V deployed as their primary consumption of NSX currently, and are looking to take advantage of all of these new feature sets. Obviously, V being, I don't want to say deprecated, but T definitely where a customer should be focused on. Is there a migration path to 3.2, or is it a multi-step process from going from a V deployment now out to the latest 3.2? What if you're walking in here with your consultant hat on, and I'm out as something like, let's say, an older 2.5-ish deployment? Where am I at up to 3.2 if I want to make the migration over to T?
So you first maybe just want to say that you made a really good point, which is that NSX-V has reached end of general support today. If you go look at the VMware lifecycle, you'll see that typically NSX-V has hit this milestone. And so we really encourage all the customers to move to NSX-T. And now
so again, EGOS, so end of general support, that it has been reached for the product. So support would be provided traditionally for 1 year, but no patches, correct? Unless it would be some extreme out of band event.
So basically, you have 2 steps. You have one which is end of general support, which typically is patches and that type of things. And then there is another stage which is 1 year later, which is end of technical guidance, and where GSS will help you, guide you in the environment. So we are the first stage, which is this end of general support.
So time is ticking for customers that are out there listening along that have those V deployments. Now it's time to engage with your SE, TAM, NSXBU resources to figure out that migration path to, if you haven't already, to absolutely start to get on board and to figure out what that migration path might look for you for your particular environment.
Yes, and for that, 3.2 helps because it brought a number of features around the V2T migration. So there has been a tool there for a while now, which is called the Migration Coordinator, which is part of NSX, which is completely supported. It's inside the product. And this Migration Coordinator was a tool typically which was in place, migrating the environment like an upgrade, and for a number of well-known understood topology. Basically, the tool was looking at your NSX-V topology and was saying, okay, that's your topology. Now you move to this topology in NSX-T, which was good, but also had the limitation that if you have a bit of a specific topology that the tool did not cover, or if you wanted a specific result in NSX-T, you are not exactly on the track. And so what 3.2 is bringing is a new model called user-defined topology. In addition, of course, we are not removing the previous tool, we are extending it, which allows typically the user to define what he wants in NSX-T in terms of topology, tier 0, tier 1s, and then to do a mapping so that to say, oh, this component in NSXV, this edge service gateway, maps to this tier 1. And the tool will migrate those configurations from one to the other. And the tool has two modes. One which is in place. We migrate this configuration and then we move your hosts in place like an upgrade. We put them in maintenance mode and we switch them from V to T. Or one which is called configuration only, which will take your NSX-T environment, your NSXV configuration, and move it into an NSX-T configuration, but will not prepare the host for you, with the idea that maybe you have side-by-side environment and you will be the one moving the VMs because you have a network refresh, hardware refresh, or because you want to have control over which application moves when. So
AV deployment, right? Or true
exactly,
failback
AV
if necessary.
Yeah. Exactly. So yes, and in addition to that, there are other V2T features. So typically Ospf support, which was added to the tool, and also VIO integration for the customers who have VIO. We've worked already with VRA. We worked with VCD, who published a tool to migrate customers, and we have one for VIO, with the idea that when you have those consumption model on top, so those cloud management platform, they are consuming NSX, you cannot just move NSX from V2T and not tell the cloud management platform. Otherwise, it's lost, like where are all my objects? So you need to do that in an intelligent way where things can be retied together with the new NSX-T objects. And so that's what has been added with VIO in this release.
I have an upgrade question, as long as we're talking about migration. The upgrade question to 3.2, like there's two ways. I'm running it in my data center, and therefore I just need to upgrade. How hard is that? And then if I'm using VMC and AWS or another cloud service where I'm running NSX-T as my fabric, how do I get a new version of NSX-T? I'm sure people that do this know this already, but I'm just curious, how does this work?
Yeah, I think 3.2 again has brought forward a nice feature where we've actually got a migration coordinator, or pardon me, an upgrade coordinator. Let me go in, peer into your environment, and make sure that we're not going to trip over any any configuration issues. So that's something that's actually new in 3.2.0.1. You'll notice that there is an actual upgrade coordinator. So those from 3.1.3.5 to 3.2.0.1, those upgrades are very well understood, and they're reasonably easy to do. Now, the nice thing about being a VMC on AWS customer or an AVS customer, you're not actually going to be doing those upgrades. It's actually the cloud service provider that provides that upgrade for you. Even in VMC VCF. Those upgrades are typically handled via SDDC Manager. So you're not having to think about sort of, is this compatible with that? It's just sort of done on your behalf, or done at least in a sort of scripted way. So, depending upon your consumption model, you'll get to, these new features, one way or the other kind of thing.
I could just say how much I love coming into my new management interface, and then there's new things that I go, wait, what happened? Where did it? Oh, I just upgraded my iPhone the other day, and it was like the whole browser with the URL at the bottom now and at the top, and it's just like a whiplash. Like, do we manage that kind of stuff in the cloud, VMC and if I'm buying VMC and AWS, I assume that we must communicate and manage when these type of things are going to happen, so that I'm minimizing my whiplash.
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't want to be working in frontline support the day after an upgrade like that if we're not helping customers. So we have actually really interesting ways of interacting with those types of customers, little chat bots to different ways of distributing the information. So it works really, really well.
Awesome. All right, we got 5 minutes left. Always fun to ask. Geoff, we'll start with you. What excites you about 2022, right? Like what excites you for the rest of the year? I know you can't obviously talk about proprietary stuff that's not announced yet, but what's exciting for you in the networking and security space? Looking forward.
Yeah, I mean, we just came off something called Log4j or Log4Shell. So, you know, again, we should have a moment of silence for all those poor folks that lost their Christmas holidays to having to patch for this. But
they don't give it back either, right?
No.
Like everybody just goes, oh well, Christmas, New Year, let's go. And I'm like, wait, we just worked 3 weeks during the holiday segment to solve for this, right? Yeah.
No, but I'm truly excited about working with customers and, you know, finding ways to sort of mitigate against some of these future things that could come out, so that we can deal with, you know, a signature update will help us have a compensating control for, you know, these types of events. I'm looking forward to COVID being, I don't know, over or back to normal, whatever we're going to call it. And I'm certainly looking forward to Vmworld being in person in, I guess, the end of August timeframe.
Right. All right. Thomas, I'll ask you the same thing.
Yeah, we're thinking the same. Like if COVID could stop, and I would be really happy to have VMworld in person again, like meet customers, and that would be really great.
Yeah, I think so. I'm going to have to get myself a nice mask or something, right? I've held back getting like, you know, super cool masks. I just use a standard white N95 because I never leave my office. But I'm going to have to go get something cool. Maybe we'll do some cool VMworld branded, you know, masks that'll go on top of an N95 or something, so that you got like something, you know, attractive and cool looking. Maybe our Twitter handle, you know, etched on the I don't know. They got to do something. This should be fun. So I'm also looking forward to that. All right, we've made it to the end of the podcast. We have a couple minutes left, so we always do a little V barbecue report. Tony Foster says he doesn't have anything interesting, but I did a tri-tip yesterday that was just traditionally salt, pepper, a little soy sauce, and marinated overnight, and then just throw it on Kingsford charcoal, and you know, you just can never go wrong with that, especially if you just pull it off at the right time. But I saw an interesting recipe that I thought I would share. I'm going to do this over the next week. It was barbecued ribs, but it was fried barbecued ribs. You marinate your ribs, you cut them into individual, you take the baby backs and you slice them into individual ribs, and then you put a sauce on them, and you put them on the barbecue for like 5 minutes, and you just cook them a little bit and put a glaze on them, right? You know, toughen them up a little bit. Then you take those off and you get a pot of hot oil. You put oil on your barbecue and you heat up your oil, and you then dip these, you fry them in the oil, right? And it then, you know, fries them. They have another process. You pull them out and dip them in a little bit of another marinade, right, to give that another little crust. Refry them again, then take them out and put them on the barbecue for another 10 minutes, right? And you have like super crispy, crunchy, fried, barbecued ribs. I'm going to do that, and then I'll let you know how it goes. So that's a cool report.
Too. Yeah,
Geoff, I'll go to you. Any favorite barbecue, either that you make or that you like to go buy and eat?
Well, I live in Canada. I live in Calgary. We're not known as a barbecue mecca of
moose. You guys get the barbecue moose up there somewhere?
No, you have to be very lucky to come across a moose. But I am an avid barbecuer. I own a smoker. I probably took the advice off of one of the previous podcasts. So I'm a Traeger fan. I do a good, I'm not going to say great, but a good brisket. But, you know, it's a little cold here right now, so we got to let it warm up. And it's probably about March I'll be able to start up the Traeger again and start participating. So
yeah, awesome. Thomas, in France, do you guys get to barbecue very much?
Not so much. At least in France, I was living in a flat, in an apartment, so not really. But here I have a barbecue, and I'm starting to get used to it. I'm new to it, but it's great. I like to try new things.
I know when I first started out of college and I got married and I had my own little place, I did barbecue, and I would do barbecue chicken. And, you know, no one told me to put the lid on the barbecue. So when you're starting to learn to barbecue, like there's a lot of little simple things. Nowadays we have YouTube. You can go YouTube it and watch, and it's easy, much easier. But in the days, so I burnt the living tar out of my original barbecue chicken, right? Because, you know, and I put the glaze on too early, because I didn't know that you you put the glaze on in the last 30 minutes of the barbecue, not at the beginning. So I would have little charcoalettes of burnt glaze barbecue sauce on these pieces of chicken for years. It took me. So it is one of these things that you learn and you get better at year after year. So you get some time here to have that done. We're at the end of the hour. Thanks for everybody. Shout out to Graham and Tony Foster, Susan Wu, Brandon Lee for doing the blog article that we kind of walked through. Good time. We're going to have, I think there's a new release of Vsphere coming out and pretty soon. So maybe next week we'll have somebody on for that possible new release of Vsphere. I'm not allowed. I don't know if I'm allowed to say that yet or not, but we will be here again next week, I think, talking about Vsphere. Until then, go check out that the multi-cloud video. It's worth watching. Kit's great at the end. The customer's great at the end. And it is now lunchtime here. I'm going to go have some barbecued tri-tip from last night. Geoff, Thomas, thanks for coming on the show.
Thank you.
Pleasure. Thank you very much.